Welcome to Chapter 24. In Chapter 24, we are going to cover the Diels-Alder reaction and other pericyclic reactions. Here's the outline for our lecture. You can see that we're going to talk about the Diels-Alder reaction first, then we'll go into thermal versus photochemical cycloadditions, and finally we'll finish with oxidative cycloadditions. First, let's start with the Diels-Alder reaction. The Diels-Alder reaction is represented in this slide. As you can see, the dienophile is going to react with a conjugated diene. You can see the flow of electrons here, where the dienophile electrons go to form a bond between the dienophile and the diene. Then the double bond comes down, and then the electrons come over. The transition state is shown here, where you can see the bonds half formed and half broken. The product is a new 6-membered ring with a double bond and 2 new sigma bonds. In the picture down here, you can see the 2 carbons from the dienophile represented in the product. Let's look at the arrows in a little bit more detail just so we can outline these. So I'm going to draw the electrons from the dienophile double bond, and those are going to come in and form our new sigma bond. So those red electrons represent that new red bond that I've just drawn in over there. I'm going to color that first double bond in green. Those electrons are going to come down and form the new double bond. So there's the new double bond that I just drew in. And the last set of electrons, let's do in pink, that double bond is going to come over and form the new sigma bond down here. You can see that in the Diels-Alder reaction, we need a lot of heat and a lot of pressure in order to get this reaction to occur. Here we have molecular orbital diagrams of the diene and dienophile. For these reactions to proceed, we have to get overlap between the HOMO of the diene and the LUMO of the dienophile. Remember that our HOMO is our highest occupied molecular orbital, so it contains electrons, and those electrons are going into the LUMO, or the lowest unoccupied molecular orbital of our dienophile. These reactions have to work well in terms of orbital overlap, or our reaction is not going to be able to proceed. In this picture, this is showing orbital overlap in the Diels-Alder reaction. So you can see constructive interference shown here and here, because the HOMO of the diene and the LUMO of the dienophile are going to match up. You could also have the opposite situation, where we have the LUMO of the diene and the HOMO of the dienophile interacting. And this is also a good situation. We just have to make sure that that gap is small. If we look at our previous slide, you can see that the difference between the HOMO and the LUMO is approximately the same difference between the HOMO and the LUMO of the dienophile and the diene. So we want to make that gap smaller in order to make our reaction proceed easier. This first example that we saw, we had to use high temperature and high pressure, and if we decrease that HOMO-LUMO gap, our reaction is going to proceed faster. So how do we decrease that HOMO-LUMO gap? What we end up doing is we put an electron donating group on our diene and an electron withdrawing group on our dienophile. And when we do that, that's going to make this HOMO-LUMO gap smaller. And when the HOMO-LUMO gap is smaller, the reaction is going to proceed faster. Let's look at some examples of what we can use as electron donating groups and electron withdrawing groups. The nice thing is we don't have to learn anything new. We can use examples of donating groups that we learned from Chapter 23, Electrophilic Aromatic Substitution. All of those groups that we talked about that were good donating groups for electrophilic aromatic substitution are also going to be good donating groups for the Diels-Alder reaction. So you can see we have lots of methyl groups. Methyl groups are good donating groups, an ether. And so those are all good dienes that are going to proceed well in the Diels-Alder reaction. For dienophiles, again, you can see that what we learned in chapter 23 can be applied here. We have electron withdrawing groups that we saw in chapter 23 as good electron withdrawing groups. An aldehyde, a ketone, an ester, a nitrile, those are all strongly electron withdrawing groups, and those are going to work well in the Diels-Alder reaction. Let's look at a specific example of a reaction that can proceed better. In this example, we have 1,3-butadiene, and now for the dienophile, we have an electron withdrawing group. Now that there is an electron withdrawing group on the dienophile, the reaction is going to proceed faster. You see that we can get this reaction to go in toluene with a little bit of heat. Toluene is just the solvent used for this reaction, and the yield is pretty good at 96%. In this second example here, we have a dienophile that has a double bond on both sides. And actually, if we use 2 equivalents of the diene, this can react once on the left side and then again on the right side. In this bottom example, we have a triple bond. The triple bond is going to react in a similar fashion, where the blue electrons come over to form the sigma bond. The double bond electrons come over, and the last double bond there comes to form our final sigma bond. Notice that because we have an extra 2 bonds in the triple bond, that we're also going to end up with a double bond in the product. All of the examples we've seen so far have been symmetrical, meaning that we don't have to worry about mixtures of diastereomers or mixtures of regioisomers in our products. Now let's look at an example with unsymmetrical reagents. Notice here that we have an ether attached to our diene and an aldehyde attached to our dienophile, and that means that we can potentially get 2 products. And this is where we have to figure out which product is preferred. So situation 1 over here with the ether on top is going to lead to product 1, where the ether and the aldehyde are next to each other. And when you flip the diene and put the ether on the bottom, that will lead to the product on the right, where the aldehyde and the ether are farther apart. So how do we figure out which one is favored? We're going to use resonance. So what we're going to do is we're going to draw out the resonance structures that are possible of our diene and our dienophile and match things up. Let's look at an example of a bad resonance structure. In this one, we have a ketone instead of an aldehyde, but the concept is the same. Our ketone is an electron withdrawing group, so we can pull electrons up onto the oxygen. We can push this double bond here up onto the O. Right, that becomes a lone pair on the oxygen. And when we push these electrons in blue over, that will give us the double bond in blue on the right. Just going to finish this in by drawing out the lone pairs. Notice that what we end up getting is we get a negative charge on the oxygen and a positive charge on the carbon. So for adding charges, it's not a great resonance contributor, but it is a contributor. And based on that, we can figure out where the delta minus and the delta plus is. And that's what it's showing here on the resonance hybrid. So if you draw out the structure, your original molecule has a delta minus on the oxygen and a delta plus on the carbon. Let's look at the specific example that we were doing on the previous slide. That example had an ether and an aldehyde. The ether can push electrons all the way down to the carbon, and the aldehyde can push electrons all the way up onto the O-. So what does this tell us? This tells us that there is a delta minus on the ether. There's the delta minus. And on the aldehyde, we have a delta plus. To figure out our product, we just line these up. And the product is shown here. We're matching up the delta plus and the delta minus to get the correct orientation. That means that the major product is this one here, where the ether and the aldehyde are closer together, and the other product is a minor product, and seen hardly at all because we're not getting the correct overlap between the plus and the minus. Another thing that's important to the Diels-Alder reaction is the conformation of the diene. Notice that in the Diels-Alder reaction, you have to have the diene in this S-cis conformation in order for the reaction to occur. When the diene is in the S-trans conformation, you can see that the ends of the diene are too far away from the dienophile, so it has to be in the correct conformation. If it's in the S-trans conformation, and the S-trans conformation is going to be favored, it's going to do a rotation to get to the S-cis conformation. There is a mild interference, and you can see the bumping here between the two hydrogens. The S-trans is preferred, so you do have to get over a hump or an energy barrier in order to get to this S-cis conformation. That means that if you make your hydrogens bigger groups, this is going to be a lot harder, and it's going to make the Diels-Alder reaction not proceed as well. In these examples, you can see that we have a substrate that is locked in the S-trans conformation. This substrate here is not going to be able to undergo any type of reaction because it can't rotate. In this bottom one, you're going to get too much steric hindrance. Let's imagine if this is rotated. I'm going to redraw it here. The methyl groups are both going to be pointing in, and this is not favored. So we have too much steric interference between those two groups, and it's not going to happen. You can imagine this picture is trying to show that rotation where it's in the S-trans conformation. It tries to rotate around, and you're just getting too much strain in this S-cis conformation. Diels-Alder reactions work better when the diene is locked into the correct conformation, because then you don't have to worry about it doing this rotation. The rotation from the S-trans to the S-cis conformation, you have to get over that energy barrier, and that is going to cause a problem. So if you've locked everything into the S-cis conformation, the reaction is going to proceed a lot better. Let's look at this picture here, and if you're following the electrons here, the blue electrons are going to form the bond in blue that I just circled there. The double bond comes over and forms the new double bond. And that last pair of electrons is going to come over and form our new sigma bond. The CH2 in the middle, I'll circle in pink, and you can see two different pictures that show how that can be drawn. Either form is acceptable. They're just trying to give you an idea of how this is going to work out. Here's another example. In this one, we have two CH2 groups, and we're also reacting with an alkyne. So the resulting product has a double bond.